I can still hear the sound of the $100 bill hitting the marble floor, the way it fluttered in the air like a leaf falling from a tree. It wasn't just money, though. It wasn't even about the insult my father intended by tossing that crisp green bill at my feet. No, it was about something much more significant. It was the moment I truly understood that I had no place in the life my parents had meticulously built for me. A life that demanded blind obedience, rigid tradition, and unquestioning loyalty to a family name that felt more like a cage than a legacy. I had always known what was expected of me. I was the son of Richard and Claudia Harrison, the heirs to a long-standing dynasty of bankers. My grandfather had built the Harrison and Sons empire from the ground up, turning it into a name that carried weight in the financial world. But the more I saw of that world, the less it felt like a place where I belonged. I was raised in a mansion that echoed with the voices of past triumphs, framed portraits of men in tailored suits whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. The grandeur of our home was a constant reminder of the success I was supposed to inherit, the expectations I was meant to fulfill. But deep inside, I felt a growing restlessness, a need to break free, to chart my own course, to leave behind the gilded cage that my family had constructed for me. It wasn't that I hated the life they offered. No, it was something more subtle, more profound. I didn't hate the luxury or the privilege, but I hated the emptiness that came with it. I watched my father, a man who had everything the world could offer: money, power, influence, and yet seemed to be forever chasing something he could never catch. His eyes, though sharp and calculating, were always clouded with dissatisfaction, as if all the wealth and accolades had not filled the hollow space inside him. My mother, too, wore her wealth like a mask, each diamond ring larger than the last, each one trying to fill the void left by a lifetime of unspoken disappointments. I could see the emptiness in her eyes, the same emptiness I feared would one day find its way into mine if I stayed. I had always known that their dreams for me were not my own. Their version of success had never felt like mine. And yet, I had tried to be what they wanted. I had spent years molding myself into the ideal son, the obedient heir to their legacy. But deep inside, I knew that if I stayed, I would lose myself forever. The decision to leave came suddenly, but it was not without a growing sense of inevitability. The tipping point was my graduation day. After years of struggling to meet their expectations, I had finally earned my engineering degree, a feat that should have been celebrated. And yet, my parents chose not to attend the ceremony. The sting of their absence hit me harder than I had expected. I had worked so hard for this moment, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would see something in me that they hadn't before. But instead, they treated it like an afterthought. Their silence spoke volumes. It was as if my success was irrelevant, an insignificant footnote in the grand narrative of their carefully constructed lives. When I got home that night, standing in the vast, empty expanse of the living room, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and priceless art, I knew that I could not stay any longer. The mansion that had been my home for so long suddenly felt suffocating, its grandeur a constant reminder of the life I could never truly call my own. My father stood before me, his face twisted in disdain. "You've wasted your life," he spat. "Engineers are glorified mechanics. No son of mine is going to throw away everything for some foolish dream." His words stung, but they did not wound me as deeply as I thought they would. I had been expecting them after all. He could not see what I saw. He could not understand the fire that burned inside me, the vision I had for my future that had nothing to do with investment banking and everything to do with technology. I knew that if I stayed, I would be just another cog in the machine, destined to follow a path that was not my own. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to them, trying to be the son they wanted, and I had failed. But that failure was not the end. It was the beginning. It was the moment I realized that I didn't need their approval to succeed. I didn't need their money, their connections, or their name. What I needed was the freedom to create something of my own, something that wasn't defined by the past, but by my own vision of the future. And so, when my father threw the $100 at me, it wasn't just money. It was a challenge that I was ready to accept. "Keep the trust fund," I said, stuffing the bills into my wallet. I'll build something of my own. As I turned to leave, I caught one last glimpse of the life I was leaving behind, the life of privilege, of wealth, of power. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the freedom to break free from it all. The gates to our estate closed behind me with a final, resonant clang, and I walked away. Free, but with nothing but the $100 in my pocket and a suitcase full of dreams. The world outside was different, rawer, more uncertain. I had no plan, no support, and barely any money. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college with an engineering degree that my family had never truly valued, a suitcase full of clothes, and exactly $100 to my name. But I also had something they couldn't take from me, a vision for the future, a belief that there was more to life than the narrow world they had shown me. I walked to the bus station, my mind racing with possibilities. With no car of my own, my father's name was on the deed to the vehicle. I was forced to buy a bus ticket with the last of my money. The ride to Silicon Valley was long and uncomfortable, but every mile seemed to pull me farther from the life I had left behind and closer to the life I was about to build. When I arrived in the valley, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer willing to live a life defined by other people's expectations. I was ready to create my own legacy. The first night in Silicon Valley was a humbling experience. I slept on a park bench in Palo Alto, using my laptop bag as a pillow and my jacket as a blanket. It was cold, uncomfortable, and lonely, but it was also liberating. I knew I was at the beginning of something big, something that had the potential to change the world. But in that moment, I was just another young dreamer trying to make it in a world that didn't care about me or my ambitions. I had no connections, no money, and no idea how I was going to make it. But I had something more valuable than any of those things: determination. The next morning, I had only $50 left. I bought a coffee and a bagel with what little I had, sitting in a small cafe, watching the world go by. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 3 promises to myself. I would never use the Harrison name for gain. I would build something that would change the world. And when I returned, it would be on my own terms. I had no idea where that journey would take me. But as I looked out at the bustling streets of Palo Alto, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer running away from something. I was running toward something, toward a future that I could call my own. And with $100 in my pocket and a mind full of ideas, I was ready to see where it would lead me. The days blended together in Silicon Valley, each one a blur of exhaustion and ambition. I had left everything behind: my family, their wealth, their expectations. And yet, every step I took felt like I was inching closer to something bigger. I was no longer defined by the Harrison name. I was simply Daniel, a young man with a vision that no one believed in but me. The hardest part was not the physical struggle, but the mental toll. Every day I wrestled with doubt. Was this the right choice? Was I wasting my time? Would I ever make something of myself? I was living off scraps, both financially and emotionally. The cafe where I worked during the day became my only refuge. I woke up before dawn to scrub counters and make coffee, the clink of cups and the hum of machines drowning out the nagging voice in my head that told me I was crazy for trying to change the world with nothing but my ideas and my willpower. At night, after the cafe closed, I would sit in the back room, my laptop perched on a pile of napkins, and work on my designs, sketching out the molecular structure for a new kind of energy storage system that could revolutionize the industry. It felt like a dream, one I wasn't sure I had the strength to make real. There were nights when I felt like I was just spinning my wheels, stuck in a place where no one cared about my ideas. My professors had dismissed my project in college, calling it too far-fetched. My father had laughed at me, calling me delusional. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something there, something important. The world was moving toward renewable energy. I could feel it. See it in every report, in every conversation. But the technology wasn't there yet. The storage systems for solar and wind power were inefficient and prohibitively expensive. I had an idea, a theory I had developed back in school, but no one else thought it would work. Still, I had to try. I had to prove them wrong. And then, Maya entered my life. She was the barista at the cafe, a woman with a quiet kindness that I didn't expect to find in a place like this. We didn't talk much at first, but one day, after I had spent hours hunched over my laptop, staring at a screen full of calculations and diagrams, she came over and sat down next to me. "You're working on something important, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes scanning my notebook. It wasn't a question of curiosity, it was a statement. She had an uncanny ability to see through people, to sense what was going on beneath the surface. "I've been watching you," she continued. "You've got that look. The kind of look that says you're not giving up no matter what." I smiled, embarrassed. She was right, of course. I wasn't giving up. But some days I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep going. "You know," she said, "if you're ever tired of sleeping in your car, you can crash in the back room. I'm sure my boss won't mind." It was a small gesture, but it meant more to me than she could have known. That night, I stayed in the back room of the cafe, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee beans and the hum of refrigerators, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Maya had offered me something I hadn't even realized I needed: stability, a place to breathe, a place to work without the constant worry of where I would sleep or how I would get by. Over the next few weeks, Maya and I became friends, and through our late-night conversations, I began to find a new sense of clarity. Her questions, simple, yet profound, challenged me to think about my designs in a different way. One evening, she leaned over my shoulder as I was working on a diagram and asked, "So, basically, you're building a better battery, right?" I shook my head, still unsure how to explain it. "It's not just a battery," I said. "It's a whole new kind of energy storage, one that doesn't lose so much energy in the transfer process." Maya was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed as she processed my words. "But why isn't anyone else doing this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Isn't that the big problem with energy storage?" I paused. That was the question I had been asking myself for months. "Because it's theoretically impossible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No one thought it could work. But I think I found a way." It was the first time I had said those words aloud, and for the first time I began to believe them myself. Despite my progress, I knew that I needed more than just my own belief to bring this idea to life. I needed help. I needed resources. That's when I met David Chin, a local tech entrepreneur who had a reputation for backing disruptive ideas. He had heard about my work from a mutual friend, and when he reached out to me, I saw an opportunity to take my project to the next level. David was different from the people I had met before. He didn't look at me like I was crazy. He looked at me like I was onto something. "Your energy storage system could change everything," he said. "But to build it, you're going to need funding. Real funding." That was the hard part. I didn't have any connections, no wealthy investors who would jump at the chance to support me. But David had connections, big ones. He introduced me to Dr. Sarah Wong, a leading researcher in molecular engineering at Stanford, who had built her own career on pushing the boundaries of what was possible. When I showed her my designs, she didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, she spent hours grilling me, testing my theories and pushing me to think deeper. "This is ambitious," she said at the end of our meeting, her voice tinged with both skepticism and admiration. "Maybe impossible, but if it works, you'll change the world." Her words lingered in my mind long after our conversation ended. It was the validation I had been searching for, the moment when everything I had been working toward finally felt possible. But I knew that I wasn't there yet. I needed to prove that my idea wasn't just a theory, that it could be built, that it could work in the real world. And to do that, I needed funding. Serious funding. David helped me craft a pitch for venture capitalists, but even that was a struggle. The first 2 firms I pitched to turned me down. "Brilliant," they said, "but too risky." I was crushed. I had come so far only to be rejected again. Then came the 3rd meeting. This time, I wasn't pitching my idea as some idealistic dream. I was pitching it as a business. The venture capitalist firm, Quantum Ventures, was interested in green technologies, and they saw potential in my energy storage system. Alexander Martinez, the lead partner, listened carefully as I laid out my vision. He asked tough questions, but this time I had answers. "Your technology could revolutionize renewable energy storage," he said. "But why should we trust a 23-year-old with no track record?" I didn't hesitate. "Because I've spent the last year proving that impossible things are possible. Give me a chance to prove one more." After what felt like an eternity, they agreed. Quantum Ventures invested $5 million in my company, Nova Energy Systems, for a 25% stake. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life, but it was also the validation I needed. It was the first step toward making my dream a reality. With the funding in place, I moved forward. But success didn't come easily. There were endless technical challenges, failures, and moments of doubt. But with each setback, I became more determined. I knew that if I could get this right, if I could make energy storage efficient, I would change the world. And no one, no professor, no investor, no critic was going to stop me. The breakthroughs didn't come overnight, but slowly, over time, my designs began to work. After months of late nights, endless revisions, and a few more failures, we finally achieved the results I had been hoping for. An energy storage system that could store and transfer energy at nearly 99.1% efficiency, 3 times better than the best systems available. The industry took notice, and Nova Energy Systems went public. The stock price skyrocketed, and just like that, I was a millionaire. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the validation. It was about proving that my vision, my idea, had been worth fighting for. Looking back, I realized that every moment of struggle, every sleepless night, had led me to this point. I had gone from being a kid with a dream to a CEO with a company that could change the world. But the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. 5 years had passed since I walked out of that mansion with $100 in my pocket and a head full of dreams. 5 years of struggle, failure, perseverance, and finally success. I had built something from nothing. Nova Energy Systems was a billion-dollar company now, revolutionizing the way the world stored and used energy. I had achieved everything I had set out to do and more. But as I sat in my sleek office overlooking Silicon Valley, surrounded by accolades and the bright promise of a future that stretched before me, something inside me stirred. I had created my own legacy, but there was still something unfinished. Something I had to do before I could fully move on. I had spent my entire life running from the shadows of my family. My father, Richard Harrison, had made it clear that I was never meant to be anything other than an extension of his success. A cog in the machine that was Harrison and Sons. His voice still echoed in my mind, cold and dismissive, telling me that without the family name, I was nothing. He had cast me aside like an inconvenience when I dared to choose a different path. But now, after all I had accomplished, I was no longer that young man who had walked away. I was Daniel Harrison, not just by name, but by everything I had built. And it was time to return home, not as the prodigal son seeking forgiveness, but as a man with a plan. A man who was about to take everything. I remember the day I made the decision to return. It wasn't about revenge, or at least not entirely. It was about something much bigger. My family's empire, Harrison and Sons, was crumbling. The world had moved on from the days of old money, of traditional investment banking, and my father's firm had been caught in the crossfire. Technology had disrupted everything. The firm was fighting a losing battle, and the world had shifted beneath their feet. They were drowning, and they didn't even know it yet. But I did. I knew that if I didn't act, Harrison and Sons would die, just like every other outdated institution that couldn't keep up with the times. It was then that I realized I wasn't just returning to my family's business to take back what was mine. I was returning to save it, to modernize it, to bring it into the future. The Harrison name wasn't just a weight that I had to carry anymore. It was a tool I could use to create something meaningful, something that mattered. And I was the only one who could do it. So, I booked my flight and made the journey back to the place that had once felt like a prison. I wasn't sure what kind of reception I would get, or if they would even acknowledge the man I had become. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't coming back to beg for acceptance. I was coming back to take what was mine, to show them that the $100 they had thrown at my feet had been the best investment they'd ever made, even if they couldn't see it. When I arrived at the headquarters of Harrison and Sons, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. The building had barely changed in the years since I left. It still had that old, imposing limestone facade, the gold lettering, the air of arrogance that came with centuries of wealth. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the place that had told me I wasn't worth anything without the family name, the place that had dismissed me as a failure. And now, I was standing here as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, about to take it all. I walked through the doors of Harrison and Sons, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. Not because of the name on the door, but because of the journey I had taken, the battles I had fought, and the empire I had built. I didn't need them to accept me anymore. I didn't need their approval, but I was going to make them see who I had become. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The board members were nervous, their whispers filling the room. They had no idea who I was now. They had no idea what I had become. When they filed in one by one, their eyes slid over me without recognition. But I wasn't the naive young man who had walked out of this place 5 years ago. I wasn't the son they had dismissed. I was the CEO of Nova Energy Systems, and I was here to take control. My father was the last to enter the room. He looked older, worn down by the stress of running a failing business. His once commanding presence was diminished, his pride chipped away by years of stagnation. When he saw me, his face went pale. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw something in his gaze that I had never seen before. Fear. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated everything. Now, the tables had turned. "James?" one of the board members said, his voice shaky as he looked at me. He had known me as a child, but this was no longer the child they had cast aside. I corrected him, my voice calm but firm. "It's James Blake now," I said, using the name I had adopted when I left. "And I'm here to discuss the future of this company." My father's face turned from white to red, a mixture of anger and disbelief flooding his features. "This is some kind of trick," he spat, trying to regain his composure. "You're working for Digital Horizon, aren't you? You're here to steal everything." I smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Father. I own Digital Horizon. It's a subsidiary of Nova Energy Systems. We've been quietly acquiring your company over the past year. As of today, we control 45% of your shares, and we own the majority of your corporate debt." The silence in the room was deafening. The other board members exchanged nervous glances, their discomfort palpable. My father's face had drained of all color as the reality of what I was saying began to sink in. He had never believed in me, had never thought I would amount to anything. And now, I was here. Not as the failure he had written off, but as the one who held the power to destroy everything he had built. "The offer is simple," I continued, my voice steady. "Harrison and Sons will be absorbed into Digital Horizon. The family name will be retired. The board will be dissolved. And you, Father, will step down immediately." He sputtered, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. You would destroy your own family's company? Everything we've built?" I stood tall, looking him straight in the eye. "No, Father. You destroyed it with your refusal to change. You couldn't adapt to the world as it is now. I tried to tell you that 5 years ago, but you wouldn't listen. Now, I'm here to fix it. But it won't be with the old ways. It will be with something new." The board members were silent, watching the exchange with wide eyes. This wasn't the reunion they had expected. It wasn't a heartfelt embrace or a reconciliation of old wounds. It was a power play, a takeover, not of the company, but of the legacy that had been built on the backs of others' failures. "I've given you 24 hours to accept the offer," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "If you refuse, Digital Horizon will call in all outstanding loans. Harrison and Sons will not survive the week. My father's eyes burned with fury. You would destroy everything just to prove a point? I shook my head. No, Father. I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to rebuild. The company will survive, but only if it changes. If you want to save it, you have 24 hours. If not, it will collapse and I will take everything. As I turned to leave the room, I looked back one last time. Oh, and Father, remember when you said money was the only measure of worth? I asked, my voice cold. By your measure, what am I worth now? The transition took 6 months. I restructured the company, bringing in new leadership and shifting the focus to sustainable energy investments. We let go of the outdated practices that had weighed down Harrison and Sons for decades. My father retired to the family estate, a broken man, his pride more wounded than his wallet. But I made sure he was comfortable. Despite everything, he was still my father. My mother tried to reach out a few times, her attempts at reconciliation as hollow as the diamonds she wore. But I kept my distance. Some bridges, once burned, should stay in ashes. A year later, I stood in the headquarters of Nova Energy Systems, looking out over Silicon Valley. Maya, now the head of operations for Nova, handed me a small package. Inside was the $100 bill my father had thrown at me all those years ago. Along with it was a note. You were worth more than I knew. I smiled, walking out of the office. It was time to return to the cafe where it all began. There, I left the $100 as a tip, a reminder that the true worth of a person isn't in their family name or their bank account. It's in what they choose to build with what they have. I had built an empire, not because of the Harrison name, but in spite of it. And that $100, which had once been a symbol of their rejection, had taught me the most important lesson of all. The freedom to become who you're meant to be is worth more than any fortune. As the months passed, everything seemed to fall into place. Nova Energy Systems was soaring, and I had achieved everything I had set out to do. The company had taken over Harrison and Sons, modernizing it, and it had become one of the leading firms in sustainable energy. It felt like the culmination of years of hard work, doubt, and perseverance. My father, though he had grudgingly accepted his retirement, had withdrawn into the family estate, his pride deeply wounded. My mother, too, had stopped trying to reach out, understanding at last that I would never be the son she had wanted. It was a victory that, until that point, had felt incredibly sweet. But as often happens with great success, the very thing that made you feel invincible can also make you a target. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the latest financials for Nova Energy, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from David Chin, the man who had been pivotal in helping me get Nova off the ground. David had been not just a mentor, but a friend who had supported me from the very beginning. I was expecting a routine check-in, but when I answered, his voice was strained. "Daniel," David said, his tone serious. "We've got a problem." My heart sank. "What kind of problem?" I asked, already feeling the weight of his words. "There's a mole inside Nova," he replied, the words hitting me like a blow to the chest. "Someone within your company has been leaking information to our competitors." I couldn't believe it. How could this happen? Nova Energy had come so far, and I had worked so hard to build a company based on trust and integrity. The thought of someone betraying us from the inside was almost impossible to comprehend. But as David continued, the gravity of the situation became clear. All our recent research, the new energy storage design we've been working on, it's been shared with a rival firm, one that's been aggressively trying to steal our technology. And worse, they've been offering our employees financial incentives to leave and join their team. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Do we know who it is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," David said. "But we're digging through the data. Someone in your inner circle, someone close enough to access sensitive information, has been playing both sides. And if we don't find them quickly, they'll destroy everything you've built." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. How could this happen? Who could I trust? The entire foundation of Nova was built on transparency, on a shared mission to revolutionize the energy industry. And now, someone within the company was sabotaging everything. I called a meeting with my top executives, everyone who had been with me from the beginning. The trust we had built together was about to be tested in ways none of us had expected. As we sat in the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Each of us was trying to process the gravity of the situation. "I need to know who's behind this," I said, my voice firm but with a hint of vulnerability I rarely showed. "We're not going to let someone tear this company apart from the inside." We spent the next several hours combing through every lead, every employee with access to proprietary information. But the mole, if there was one, was careful. They had covered their tracks, leaving no obvious signs. Whoever it was, they were smart, and they knew how to navigate the company without raising suspicion. The day dragged on, and the frustration was palpable. I couldn't focus. The thought of betrayal, the idea that someone I trusted, someone who had shared in the dream of transforming the energy industry, could turn against us made my stomach churn. It wasn't until late that evening, when I was about to call it a night, that I received a text message. It was from Maya. "We need to talk, urgently." I felt a chill run down my spine. Maya had been my ally, my closest confidant since my days in the cafe. She had become the backbone of Nova's operations, and I trusted her more than anyone. But something about the message made me uneasy. Why the urgency? I met her in my office, the usual warmth of her presence replaced by an unusual tension. Maya looked at me, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and fear. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know. I never wanted to be the one to tell you, but I think you need to hear it from me." My heart pounded in my chest. "Maya, what's going on?" She hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before continuing. I've been approached by the competitor. They offered me a position, offered me a lot of money to bring Nova down from the inside. At first, I didn't know what to think. I thought I could ignore it, but they've been persistent. They know my weaknesses. They know my past." I stared at her, my mind racing. Maya, the person I had trusted most, had been tempted by the very thing I had worked so hard to protect. It was a gut punch, a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. Maya's eyes welled up with tears, but she stood firm. "Because I can't do it. I can't betray you, Daniel. I'm not that person anymore. They've been pressuring me, and I've been scared. But I'm telling you now because I need your help. I don't want this life. I don't want to be a part of something like that." For a moment, I just stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. There were so many emotions swirling inside me. Anger, betrayal, confusion, but also something else. A deep sense of relief. Maya had come to me. She hadn't gone through with it. She hadn't allowed herself to be consumed by the promises of wealth and power. I stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done the right thing, Maya. I'll help you. We'll fix this." But even as I said the words, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The rival company had already made inroads, and Maya's confession was only the beginning of a much larger battle. I couldn't afford to lose focus. If I had learned anything over the past 5 years, it was that nothing could be taken for granted. Not trust, not success, not even loyalty. If I wanted to protect everything I had built, I would have to fight harder than I ever had before. The next few days were a blur of meetings, investigations, and countermeasures. With Maya's help, we were able to track down the mole, someone I had never suspected, someone so well placed within the company that it shocked me to the core. But we couldn't rest yet. The rival company had already begun to launch its own version of our technology, and now we had to work faster than ever to keep ahead of them. In the midst of all the chaos, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come, and how much more there was to lose. I had built Nova from the ground up, but I knew now that the true test of my success wasn't just in how high we had climbed. It was in how we responded when everything seemed to be falling apart. As I looked at Maya, standing beside me as we prepared for the battle ahead, I knew one thing for certain. This was not just about business anymore. This was personal, and I wasn't going to let anyone take what I had worked so hard for. Not now, not ever. If you're enjoying this journey with me, and if you want to see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything to me, and it gives me the motivation to continue creating the kind of content that pushes boundaries. Stay tuned for what's coming next, because this story is far from over.